Hello, hi, and welcome to another episode of Wellness in the Workplace. My name is Mbali Mzinyana, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. And on today's episode, we are continuing with our new series titled My Career Story, where we are interviewing women from all different walks of life, chatting about their career journey, what they've been through, how they overcame certain challenges in the workplace, and what led to them being to where they are right now. And on today's show, I have somebody who is no stranger to the world of podcasting. She has a podcast of her own, and someone whose Twitter threads always leave me wanting to make better choices when it comes to my decision making in the world of dating and relationshiping and potentially marriage at some point. Her name is Tebello Motshwane. She is an attorney, she's an entrepreneur, and she is the founder of Sister-in-Law, a platform that aims to equip and empower Black women through legal education. Welcome to Wellness in the Workplace.
Thank you, Mbali, for such a beautiful introduction.
Of course. I mean, I could have said a lot more about you, but then we wouldn't have a conversation to, chat about some of the stuff that you've done throughout your career. I mean, you've developed a very notable path and career for yourself, and it's worth obviously just chatting about and delving into. So let's save that for our conversation. Before getting into the depth of our discussion, I would like to just find out a bit more about you. I want to find out more about your background, your upbringing, and what contributed to you being the woman that you are today.
Thank you, Mbali. Like I said, thank you for a beautiful introduction. Like I said before we started, it is very nerve-wracking being on this side of the podcast. So, yes. I mean, big ups to everyone who's agreed to be a guest on my podcast. I wasn't aware that it's this scary.
Yes.
And yeah, a lot of the time I don't speak about myself. So this is going to be interesting. But just to take people back, I am Tebello. My maiden surname is Kutwane. I am born to parents who are of Soto origin. I am the firstborn of 3 siblings. So I'm the girl, and I've got 2 brothers.
Okay.
Raised in Johannesburg. Not the usual stories that we hear. Raised in Johannesburg, moved around quite a bit. My parents divorced when I was 7.
Okay.
And that then led my mom leaving with my brother and I at the time, just moving from place to place, not understanding what was going on. But obviously now being an adult myself, I finally understand the dynamics of, being a single mom and just trying to build a good life for yourself and a good life for your children, and, just trying to make sure that you empower and equip them and protect them, from the mess that adults create. So I moved around quite a bit. The last recollection was moving for the 15th time. 15th time. So I attended 4 schools, 2 primary schools actually, 2 primary schools and 1 high school, so 3 schools, but generally grew up around Midrand, Fourways, Sandton area. So those are the areas I'm familiar with. And yeah, I mean, all of that moving really just created a sense of needing stability. That's why in my adult life, I'm just about, staying in one environment for quite some time and just learning the ropes of that environment.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting that you're talking about stability, because when I think about entrepreneurship, which is what you're doing now as the founder of Sister-in-Law and your legal consultancy, that doesn't promise much stability. Yeah. So we'll talk more a bit about that. But, you've got a background in law. I mean, you're an attorney and you did spend a bit of time in the corporate space, right? Tell us more about that. How was your time in corporate? Why did you even decide to study law? How did that come about?
Sure. So law, there's a bit of a story behind it. So as a result of my parents having divorced, I often used to ask my grandfather a lot, like, why are we not visiting my dad today? Or why do we have to wait until a certain weekend or certain school holidays? Why can't we see him whenever we want to see him? You know, I was a child and I didn't understand what was going on. And he was just like, yo, you know, you have to understand the law if you want to understand the dynamics of what's going on. And, you know, he'd always also make a joke about how I'm always advocating for the animals. So when I would visit my grandparents, the cows would be outside and the horses, and I'd be like, it's so cold. Why aren't the, you know, cows and the horses inside the house sitting by the fireplace with us, you know? And he'd always be like, you're always advocating. Whenever your aunts are in trouble, you're always speaking for them. So if you study law, you'll be able to, you know, speak for people. You'll be able to be a voice for the voiceless.
Yes.
And you'll also be able to understand your family dynamics. And I think he's the person who planted a seed, you know, in me wanting to study law. I have to admit that I initially wanted to study journalism. You know, I love writing. I love investigating.
Yes.
Man on the ground. I thought I was going to be Deborah Potter, you know. I was social, you know. But it was a little bit, I also loved drama, the arts, but it was a little bit of a hard sell to, you know, my parents to say, I want to study drama, you know. And my mom even made a joke like, oh, you want to work at New Horizons, you know, Generations back in the day. You know? And I was like, okay, this is a hard sell. I don't appear to be winning. So by the time it came to applying, my three choices were, I remember in the order, it was law, journalism, and psychology.
Okay.
And psychology was purely because it sounded amazing. Like, I'm a psychologist. A therapist, you know. But I had no background of what psychologists do and whatever. So I was like, you know what, maybe there's something in law. And that's how I got into law. And the first family law lecture, I was sold.
You knew
I was
that
just
this was
like,
it.
I'm right where I'm supposed to be. It was just so interesting, learning, you know, of the family dynamics. And that's where my interest for family law came about.
Because that's what you specialize in now, right?
Yeah, it took a while to get back to it. I am also heavily invested in intellectual property.
Yes.
So I do a little bit of that with my other company, Collective Intelligence. But I'm definitely a family law girl, as you said at the beginning. You know, with my Twitter threads. I like the drama in family law.
Yes. I love that. So you're now a new graduate and you're about to enter the world of work. What is that transition like for you? How did you even go about knowing, you know, which area specifically that, you know, you may have wanted to trade in?
So back then, I don't even remember the year, but back then there wasn't so much information around, you know, being a legal practitioner or pursuing a career in law. I just knew that it's either I'm going to be an advocate, which I knew I hate being in court, I hate litigation, or I'm going to be an attorney. So for me, the decision was pretty easy. I knew what I didn't want, which in hindsight is great, because sometimes we focus so much on what we want that we forget that what we don't want can really just lead us back to where we need to be. So I knew I don't want litigation. I don't want to be an advocate. So I pursued job hunting for articles. And it was getting very, very, very tricky towards the end, because I really just watched the graduates who were connected, you know, family relationships, and I watched the top students secure articles.
Sure.
Right. And I wasn't connected and I wasn't a top student. So it got a little bit scary at the end, you know, that sense of rejection, like where do I fit in? How am I going to secure my future? Eventually, I landed articles at a firm in Melrose, and I started my articles journey. And I remember from month 2, so articles is 2 years, right?
Yes.
And I remember from the second month just breaking down saying, I can't believe I have 22 months of this
to
left.
go. Oh, goodness.
I absolutely couldn't believe how
so what
painful
was
it was.
It
was just the environment. My boss at the time, the first boss that I had when I started articles, he was just a bully. He was just mean. There was also a lot of undermining. I remember at the time there was a girl, a white girl who was not finished with her degree, right? She was studying at uni, so she had 2 more modules. She was going to finish in June. We all started in January. I've got a degree, but I do the groundwork. The boss even makes a comment about how my research was outstanding, and then I just got closed out of the matter. I didn't end up going to court.
Sure.
And she ended up going to court, and I kept
Sure.
thinking, but I did all the research, and now when it's time to go to court, she just gets to take over, and she's not even done. She doesn't have
She's
an
not
LLB,
even qualified.
and I've got an LLB degree, and I remember asking to change teams. But the reason why I wanted to change was because I started then saying I have an interest in intellectual property law. And I really just started speaking to the other boss who was in the intellectual property law department, forming a good relationship with him so that I could plan my move to the new team. And back then I was too scared to cite racism, bullying,
to call it what it is.
Yeah, to call it what it was. I was very, very new and come from an environment where parents are just like, put your head down and do the work. But in high school, I had my my deputy principal at the time calling me Julius Malema. He literally used to be like, you're a Julius Malema, And actually looking back, that was a microaggression in itself. Having a voice, speaking up, would really intimidate white people. So when I was at work, I was like, okay, put your head down, do the work. But that was also just so difficult. And I really carried on being, a little bit of a rebel because I kept on remembering my grandfather's words, being a voice for the voiceless.
Yes. So you're speaking to some of the systemic barriers, right, that young Black professionals typically face when they enter the workplace, more specifically young Black women. And it becomes very difficult to get a sense of perspective and motivation and still be inspired and present enough to be a contributing member of a team when you're faced with those barriers. How do you think that, you navigated that space during that time? Who did you lean on from a support perspective, whether it was in the workplace or it was at home, whatever the case is?
So I was very fortunate that very soon, or very early rather, into my career, I, met my husband. Well, he was boyfriend back then, and he was already in the legal profession, and he served as a mentor somewhat because he would sort of tell me, what to expect, what the political landscape is like in the office, that, even though, because I would always say I went to a private school, I attended school with white people, and this is not the kind of treatment that I got. And he was like, yeah, it's fine if you went to school with Amy, but remember you're working for Amy's father, who's very set in his ways.
That changes the dynamic.
And just being in a male and pale industry was a challenge. You're not with Amy anymore, who is also just as blind as you are to some of the racism that's going on in society at large. You're now working for her father, who is still set in his ways. So that was a very good support system. My mom was also very understanding a lot of the time. She would really just serve me from a nurturing perspective, just understanding, she actually validated my anger. She'd be like, if I had the guts to speak up on some of the things that you've spoken about, I really would have had a better, experience in corporate. So she would just come from a nurturing perspective, letting me know that, okay, what you're doing is good, but, don't make too much noise. But
keep your head down.
Mandela, keep going, but, keep your head down. And then the second boss that I moved to was absolutely amazing. He really gave credit where it was due all the time, and was a very good mentor as well. Even though he was white, he was very invested in empowering me. And I felt that, I don't want to say empowering, well, he was invested in empowering Black people, but I felt it felt personal. He was very interested in me,
as a person.
Also just understanding my challenges. I had a child when I was young, so I was already coming to the workplace as a mom. So he'd understand the whole school drop-off, just the dynamics at home as well. And he just made it a pleasant experience for me, validated me as a person. And then lastly, I think one of the things that helped me continue was that I was very, very sure about my contribution to not just my working environment, but to the legal profession. I understood from early in my career that my contribution matters. I am an important piece of the puzzle. And, that's what I continuously tell people. Whether you're a receptionist, whether you're a tea lady, you're an important piece of the puzzle. If your piece is missing, that puzzle is incomplete.
Sure. That's so powerful. So how did you then transition from corporate into entrepreneurship? So after this experience in, a legal firm, you eventually get admitted as an attorney, and then the transition into entrepreneurship. Where does it happen in your timeline, and what was the motivation behind that?
Sure. So like I said, it was a long 22 months to go.
Yeah.
And towards the end, I was like, I'm so done with law. I was actually just done with law. I didn't want to go back to a law firm. I didn't want to be retained. So I then said, why don't you just start your own thing? And it really just came from a place of childhood. I spent a lot of my childhood in business. I was selling yogeta.
I remember yogeta. Lollipop.
Little pin pop.
I remember
I was selling
them.
bubble gum at school. It was a thriving business.
Yeah.
And then at some point I started a car wash business.
Okay.
I was
a very resourceful girl.
I was still in primary school, definitely, and my brother was young. He must have been maybe 7 or 8, which means I was around 11. So we're walking around with a bucket, going from house to house,
washing people's cars.
Looking back, I know I was doing a horrible job, but people were, happy to give me 5, 10 rand or whatever. I think for the effort. So I've always been interested in business, from a young age, and also at some point I was staying with my aunt. The ice. Honestly, like ice lolly.
Kitty, no, it's not an ice lolly. Kitty ice in a plastic, plastic bag.
Sweet aid.
Yes.
So I'd always just been interested in working for myself, being a businesswoman. I remember I'd call myself a businesswoman from a young age.
Yes.
And I eventually just took the leap of faith, and I said, okay, I think exactly I had a month to go before my articles ended.
Okay.
I hadn't finished writing my board exams. I was left with 2 exams. And I remember just registering a company and saying, fail forward.
Sure.
So my articles then ended in January. From February, I was without a job, and I was like, you know what? I learned how to register trademarks during the time I was in the intellectual property division. So I started registering trademarks, and the number of small businesses, small black-owned businesses that took an interest in registering trademarks was, quite exciting. So that's how I really just started,
And you haven't looked back since?
I haven't looked back since. I remember just taking out some of my savings to create a website, because I thought, credibility, rent office space, that co-working space. And then I also had assistance from my boyfriend at the time. I remember he purchased my laptop, and I think I had told him it's for a 40% stake in my company.
In your company? That is a lot for just a laptop.
He's going to be like, babe,
it's time to pay up.
40%? I purchased the laptop and hit the ground running. Then fell into some financial problems. Started job hunting again. Got back into work. Had a very pleasant experience. And then started the Sister-in-Law blog while I was working. And then Sister-in-Law just blew.
It took off.
It took off. And I couldn't serve 2 masters anymore. So I had to then leave my very lucrative, stable environment and pursue Sister-in-Law. Even though I didn't know what it was going to look like. I had no face for Sister-in-Law at all. It was just a blog, and people took an interest in it.
It was a blog and a catchy blog title.
Yeah, Sister-in-Law.
Sister-in-Law. So let's talk about it. So tell us about what Sister-in-Law is today. And looking back, what do you think the intention was when you started it?
The intention was definitely from my childhood.
Okay.
From just going around, moving place to place with my mom, not understanding those dynamics, not understanding why it seemed like we were starting from, grassroots level. And I really just took an interest in what if I can empower women before they find myself in the position that my mom found myself in, you know? And that was it for me. It was just a project close to my heart, and started empowering women for free, you know, for free by being
Hashtag
out there on social media. So I started on Instagram and on Twitter, and I'm still very active there. And then it started coming to monetizing it.
Sure.
And I didn't have a plan for that either. But it took one person to say, "Hi, Tebello, I need a consultation. How much is your consultation fee?" And I was like, wait a minute.
There's a business here. Yeah.
And then I then registered the consulting side of it, or rather the company, because I had first registered sister-in-law as a trademark. I was just like, this is catchy. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but let me register it and park it. So I registered it as a trademark. Continued until someone asked to consult, and I thought, okay, I need a business account for this, you know. Don't want to give my personal bank account. I just want credibility. Registered it, and Sister-in-Law Consulting was born.
So what has been your experience since starting the platform? I mean, it went from being a blog, then you had a website, then the podcasting started. So tell us more about then the experience in terms of growing Sister-in-Law, and what your content now today and your focus, I guess, for the brand itself is centered around.
I think a lot of the growth, you know, and thank God, has been organic. And I think people have bought into it, or especially women have bought into it, because it is it's run by a woman who looks like the MA, and a woman who often shares her own experiences, her own life experiences, and just also then speaking about relatable content. I'm not speaking about things that I heard from a neighbor. Yep. I'm speaking about consistently things that people come to me about, you know, and they're like, Tebello, this is the problem that I'm facing with baby daddy, or this is the problem I'm facing with my boyfriend, or this is the problem I'm facing with my, you know, late husband, or rather late husband's family.
Yeah.
So it's always just been growth from that, from people's experiences, like lived experiences.
And people needing guidance around that, right? And in terms of then the platform itself and the growth that obviously that you've seen, how do you go about just envisioning, you know, the next step for the platform, whether it's the podcasting side of things, with you having, you know, recently had an event, whether it is on the consultancy part, what is the vision essentially, right?
A lot of the growth is actually is created by the women I interact with. So, for example, even the podcast, I was basically saying, how can there were students who'd reach out to me on a consistent basis, like, we're interested in, for example, aviation law or law of contract, and I'd be like, I can't know all of these other aspects of the law. So maybe I should get women who are already practicing in those fields to come speak to students about this. And then I thought maybe monthly mentorship sessions or whatever. And I thought, but that's not going to be practical. And that's how the podcast was born. I was like, actually, let me create a platform where we celebrate Black women in law. But in celebrating them, when they share their experiences with us, then the students can learn about the different areas of practice that exist. And then for the workshop, the idea behind it was people saying, we really need a space where we come together as women and share our experiences in a vulnerable and intimate kind of setup. And that's how the workshops were born. So a lot of it is not my idea.
Yeah, a lot of
it is
organic.
Suggestions.
I see. And so the vision then becomes collaborative for the platform.
Absolutely.
I get it. And then in terms of just, you know, representation, because what you've done with, you know, your platform is that you've carved out a space for community and a space for representation where women see themselves in some of the women that you profile, that you speak to, and even in you. What do you think the role of representation is in different kinds of spaces, whether it is in the workplace or even in the world of podcasting, or in any other, you know, environment that you may find yourself in?
I love that you used the word community. You know, my upbringing was filled with, when they say it takes a village. I was really raised by a village and fortunate to have moved around in a lot of places, because that really allowed me to build a community. So that's one of the things that I thrive at, creating and building a community. I absolutely love that word. But on the issue of representation, one of the things that I always say is that transformation can't be lip service.
Sure.
Transformation is active and living. And the only way we're going to achieve that is making sure that more and more of us are seen in these spaces and are heard in these spaces. So if we're going to achieve anything, 101 years ago, there were no women practicing law at all in South Africa. And it wasn't until the late 1960s, 70s that we had our first black women practicing law. So transformation is progressive, and it progresses through that representation, through people sharing their lived and their learned experiences in the legal profession, and just also creating that kind of environment that you're not alone. Tebello has experienced sexism, or has experienced racism, or has had to fight for a pay increase, or whatever the case is. So it's the conversations that will result in, transformation, living, and actually progressing.
Sure, I love that so much. Love that. And just coming back to then the workplace and people just really knowing their rights and their legal obligations to some extent. How do you think more people can then empower themselves through either self-learning, whatever kind of material that is out there when it comes to understanding what their rights are in the workplace?
I think we are so fortunate to have platforms like, your podcast, Wellness in the Workplace. And like I said, it's conversations. It is a lot of what we live is also through what we consume, right? So you have to be intentional about the kind of material that you consume. Everything is on YouTube nowadays. It's at the convenience of our fingertips. But what are you searching for? Are you looking for? If you're into fashion and beauty and lifestyle, that's great. But what kind of personal development content are you actively looking for? So you never stop being a student in life. Be teachable. I think being teachable, being open to having honest conversations with people as well, and also being open to receiving criticism will allow you to also do some of the groundwork. So back to your question. Sorry, I got carried away.
No, it's fine. That's exactly what we need.
Back to your question. Really, just know that the content exists and reach out to people. Hi Tebello, I saw you on Bali's podcast. Even though you specialize in family law, do you know somebody in labor law? This is what I'm going through. Or I might be able to assist myself. But just not being afraid to reach out to people. I know a lot of the time we go through challenges thinking that it's just us. But you'll be surprised at how much help you can get when you just admit, I need help, and I'm going to take the plunge and have courage to reach out. You're not alone. A lot of the time we all have the same experiences, and sometimes just having a conversation can help you avoid going through certain things. If you know that your colleague has gone through like a CCMA battle, or and they no longer work for the company, you can reach out for them and say, what was this about? How did you get into this? And you can also then avoid getting into that. But don't exist in isolation. Don't also read your employment contract in isolation and sign and be excited. I know it's an exciting time, but before you sign, reach out to even HR. If there's something you don't understand, say, paragraph 7, speaking on maternity leave. What happens when XYZ? Try to understand before you sign. Don't just sign blindly.
I love that so much. And I think it's, like you said, such an interesting time to find ourselves in, because the information is readily available and the empowerment comes from the education. And then having that intention to say, this is what I want to know, this is what I want to find out about, and I need to pretty much, I guess, put in the effort to find the resources.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. So just to start wrapping up our conversation, I want to ask you about what you know now about law and being a legal practitioner that you didn't know before you started getting into the space, and the same question but related to entrepreneurship. So what do you know now about entrepreneurship that you didn't know about when you first started?
Sure. The first one, actually about both. Okay, but more about law. Yeah. What I know now is that you don't get rich overnight.
You don't get rich overnight.
Just study, get your degree, get a job, and then live the life that you want to live. That's not how it happens. Also, I said it earlier, you never stop being a student. You absolutely cannot afford to get into law with the prospects of, once I get to the other side, it will get easier. It doesn't get easier. Information is changing every single day. When I started, or rather when I was still in varsity, there was no such thing as legal tech. And now legal tech is popular.
Okay.
So things are changing continuously. So be prepared to read. I wish I knew that I would never stop reading. Literally every single day there's something new to learn.
Yeah. And entrepreneurship?
You don't own your time.
No.
You don't.
You think when you leave the 9 to 5, you'll have time to yourself.
And I was like, I'm going to own my time. I'm not going to ask anyone for leave. You are owned by your clients. You're owned by your clients' money. You don't own your time. So one of the things that I learned from actually corporate that I apply to entrepreneurship is discipline, time management. Yes. That is important. The buck stops with you. There's nobody who says, Tebello, where's that report that I asked for? You have to just manage your time.
And in managing your time, how are you managing work-life balance? You're a mom, you're a wife, you're a sister.
Ghetto.
What does that look like for you?
The most important thing to remember is that sometimes these are they're titles, work-life balance. It's a title. Apply the triage. I try to do that. Sometimes your child, has a hammer in their head. It's just an example, or an axe in their head. Or sometimes it's your client with the axe in your head. It doesn't mean that one is less important, but at that time there's one that you have to immediately pay attention to. So like they do in the hospital with the triage, like the red is critical, and then there's like amber, which is we could attend to them tomorrow, and then there's green, which is the people who come in with a headache. Just like that. That's how my life is sometimes. Sometimes it's family stuff that's urgent. And sometimes it's business stuff that's urgent. Sometimes it's recording the podcast that's urgent because somebody has to catch the next flight out. So there's no balance, but it's just a matter of what's urgent right now.
It's about priorities.
And sometimes the three aspects of my life, they balance out perfectly. And that's beautiful.
I like that. It is about prioritizing and attending to, I guess, the urgency in that moment.
And it doesn't mean that the one is less important. It just means that it's not urgent right now.
Yes, I love that. And just in closing today's episode, I want to ask you about what wellness means to you. So what does wellness mean to you as an entrepreneur? And then as, the mom, the wife, the sister, the friend.
Sure. It's something I said earlier. In every aspect of my life, I don't undervalue or underestimate my importance of being that puzzle piece.
Sure.
So my contribution in my family matters. My contribution to my clients matters. My contribution to society, like the people who consume my content, that matters. So I know that I'm an important piece of any puzzle that I'm supposed to fit into at that specific time.
Sure. Okay. Powerful.
Thank you.
Powerful. Any closing remarks on just our topic, whether it's about, the legal field, about your podcast, or even just about, your journey of entrepreneurship for anybody listening who might want to make a jump at some point?
For me, personally, I really love the fact that I am teachable. And I think it's an important quality for people to have. Being teachable allows you to just absorb a little bit of everything from everyone. Be teachable. You can't know everything.
Yes.
Be open to being teachable.
Yes.
Consistently learning, consistently investing in yourself.
Yes. Be teachable, be curious, and I guess also be adaptable, right? Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. So for anybody listening, wanting to find out more about Sister-in-Law, where can we find you on the socials? Where can we access your podcast?
Like you said, Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook. So it's at Bells with a Z _Motshwane on all platforms. Also at Sister-in-Law on all platforms. And my podcast is Sisters in Conversation. Hopefully you'll share the link in your own description box.
Of course. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Thank you so much for being here. That was Tebello Motshwane, and she is an attorney and entrepreneur as well as the founder of Sister-in-Law. Thank you for tuning in. This was the second installment of our series, My Career Story. We're looking forward to giving you more of this kind of content. My name is Mentorship, and I will see you on the next episode. Goodbye.